I've bought a new MIG welder. It's a Cigweld Transtig185. I've had a Cigweld weld skill TIG welder for some time, and I've been using it on this old bench. I now need a bottle of MIG gas to go along with the Argon that I had for the TIG welder. Modifying the bench was the first opportunity to use the new welder to fit the 2 gas bottles. What I've got here is an old welding bench. Now, it's not one I made, it's one I bought. Well, it's just basically a mobile trolley. I've attached a vise at one end, and it was made out of this 2-inch tube, and it had some decent wheels on it. It's got a pretty crappy floor under those gas bottles. I'm modifying this trolley to take a second gas bottle. In fact, I've now done that. Prior to now, the only place a gas bottle would fit would be in this area, and the space between these rails was too narrow for a gas bottle. Similar to the front there, this space was too narrow. So I've moved this rail. See how this one here is been moved at some stage that much. You can see the mark there where it was cut and moved. Something was mounted on here, something was mounted on that one, and both rails had been moved. Now, when I wanted to fit gas bottles to this trolley, I cut free this rail and moved it back closer to where it used to be. It couldn't go back exactly where it was. It just needs about 8 inches or something for the bottles to fit between there comfortably. And I still have to set them up so that they stand vertically because the floor down there isn't even. But anyway, that's the gas bottles. This area in front of the gas bottles, I've had a bit of plywood on there in recent times. I've come across a piece of steel, a piece of plate that I am going to make fit in that area. It's 600 long this way and about 545 that way in my measurements. The piece of plate I've got is an equilateral triangle. It's 8 millimeters thick, and so how do I make that fit 600 wide, 540 deep? I went to the CAD and drew up a bit of a cutting plan for it, which involved, and I've now already cut it, which involved cutting off this corner and cutting it off so that it fits over there to square up that side. Cut off this little corner here, which gets rid of the radius end on it. I've still got a radius end there at the moment. And then cut off this peak, you'll see from my diagram there, cut off this peak so that I've got pieces that fit here, so that cleans up that edge perfectly. And I've got this piece left, which I don't know whether it's worthwhile welding it in here, maybe. Then I've got, it still doesn't give me quite the coverage that I want, but I've used pretty much all of that piece of plate, and I will look for something that will patch in the rest of that space there. So I've now got a piece of plate 600 by 545, and I'm going to V out these joins and use my new welder, which is on the front of the quad bike there. So it's got an automatic set mode where I can dial in that I've got 8 millimeter plate, and it will set the wire speed and the amperage that's suitable to weld this stuff. And I will weld it down to that area on my welding bench and hopefully get a relatively flat surface. The other bit of plate that's up underneath the vise at the other end is not 8 mil, I think it's only 6 mil, so there's going to be a bump across the middle, but this is going to be far better than a bit of plywood. Give me something to hammer on a little bit more. So that's the plan. I'm nearly ready to start tacking this piece down. The height here of 8mm versus 6mm means there's a lip there. I've V'd out and I've put these pieces of 8mm, 0.8mm TIG wire in the gaps there to maintain a gap. There's the little triangle that fills in the top there with bits of TIG wire, also making the gap. Clamps holding it down to the table. Here's the big wedge piece on this side. TIG wire maintaining the gap. Comes up fairly square across the front here and relatively square down that side. Because this is a tapered piece, it can be adjusted so that it's sort of flush here, and I'll worry about filling that gap in once this is tacked together. I'm not sure what it's going to do, whether it's going to buckle up and be a bugger. I'm going to try and get that level there perfect. Should be pretty right at the back there because it's on the same rail. A series of reasonable tacks will start the process off. Set the machine to a 8mm plate for welding those seams. This seam here where there's 6 on one side and 8 on the other, I'm thinking I'll sort of angle in a little bit like this and just call it 6mm, the plate thickness in that case, 8mm in that case. I probably haven't V'd out enough to get full penetration. I actually want to have the cleanup and being able to level the surfaces out after to be relatively easy. I won't actually it'll be effectively tacked down when this seam's done because that plate's already bolted down. Around this side, the opportunity to tack it down will be where this pipe is here and at the front and back here on the back corner. Once I get that corner in place, I could also put a couple of small beads across the front here. I don't think I'll be bothering running all the way along there. That's the next process. I'll get the welder set up and have a blast. Okay, I've tacked these pieces to the top here. I used the automatic 6mm plate, current and wire speed. This was the first weld I did, and I don't think the gas had come through the line properly for that one, but from then on I got better results. That one there had a bit of a blister on it that I've hit with the angle grinder. This was more typical of a tack weld. I'm working on filling out this last section here. I found a piece of 50mm by 50 8mm gauge angle iron. To make this piece, I cut the angle off it, and to make this piece, I ground a little bit of the angle away there, made a narrow slither to take up the 65mm or so that was needed. So I nearly filled that hole in. Going to work out all right. I'm at the stage at the moment where these pieces sort of fit there, but there's no real weld clearances. So I'm going to narrow them down a bit more, bevel them, and shorten this end up a fraction. We should be there with a complete 8mm table. A bit of mucking around, but haven't spent a cent on materials, so just utilising shit that was laying around the house. These are pieces cut from a piece of 50mm by 50mm angle iron that was 8mm thick. I've almost filled this hole where the radius was. I've just put the remaining hole was big enough to put that bolt through, just to put a washer underneath to bring it up level. And I've got a clamp there with some gaps between the pieces so that there's room for the weld to run in. So I'm ready to put some tacks on that. Remains this little corner here, which I think I might also be able to find a piece of that angle iron to fill that gap. So I'll do that after I've gone a bit further. Well, that's my first attempt at welding, and it's pretty awful. Part of the problem initially was I couldn't see. We've got some big build-ups here. It'll take a bit of grinding away. So I couldn't see. I did sort of short little bursts along there. Another big build-up, probably where a tack was. I got some grinding to do, certainly. And then we'll see what we've got. I had a slightly better go over this side. That run there was better. Had better lighting on this side. So I've run down that seam. It's 8mm on the right hand side and 6mm on the left hand side. So my welding down that side, well, it's going to hold the plates together and nothing's going to move, but we'll see what it looks like once I've given it a polish up. I'll turn my little light off here. That hole there is because of the radius piece. I may or may not fill that. There's still a hole there to look at. Look, overall, I've got to say I'm reasonably pleased, and we'll see what it looks like now after, I think, an hour of grinding. That's after a bit of grinding, the bigger lumps off. There are places where the groove hasn't filled. My weld was out a bit. Not overly concerned about that. Don't know whether I'll bother trying to run a bit more in there just to get a perfect finish. I'm also trying to decide whether I bother trying to remove this powder coat or not. I'm thinking not at this stage. I might revisit this top at some stage when I'm a bit more motivated. Maybe block up these holes. They're sort of countersunk holes. They're probably ideal for dropping a countersink bolt in and welding them in place to block those holes. I've got that hole here, and I've still got this little piece there to fill if I can be bothered. But otherwise, the old battery angle grinder's been going crazy on it. Doesn't use a lot of discs. It uses a few batteries. Pays to have about 3 on the go. You get through it. Thing's got plenty of guts for a while till the battery runs down. I've welded in 2 little pieces there. They were just the ends of a piece of the scrap. This is a piece of scrap 8mm angle. You can see where the angle's been cut off that, and a chunk's been cut off this side and a chunk's been cut off this side, and that's the angle of the angle. So that piece, there's 2 pieces in there, 2 little triangles that were just scrap from the original piece of 50 by 50 angle that I used for doing these other 2 pieces. So that's filled that gap pretty easily. I'll give it a grind and see what it looks like. So this is going to be the last series of clips, me making this metal plate fit this welding table. I've got a bottle of argon and a bottle of MIG gas, which is argon about 92% and 5% carbon dioxide and 3% oxygen for the MIG torch. I think the carbon dioxide and the oxygen helps with splatter or something when you're doing MIG. Otherwise they're both pretty much argon. I haven't got the regulator on the argon there. So on this bench I'm going to have 2 welders, MIG welder and my TIG welder. The TIG is an AC inverter welder, which that's it there. Will weld aluminium and finer mild steel work, but I suspect I'm going to do a lot more mild steel work now with my new MIG machine. This top is 8mm, so a big hammer won't affect the sections over there that I've tacked together. Will all be worked together now as a relatively flat surface. I'm not going to do any more on this now. I actually ran the thin cut-off wheel down some of these marks and made them look a whole lot worse, and I sort of regret doing that. I tried with just the welder set to 2mm plate to put a bit of weld on, and really it needs to be set a lot hotter than that to get a bead to run into those grooves, and then it's going to take a lot of grinding to knock the top off again, which I'm not in the mood for doing at the moment. So I'm going to call that done. I'm going to leave the rough old powder coat surface on there. I'm almost tempted to spray a bit of primer on the bare metal surface, although, you know, this surface over here has just got surface rust on it. Maybe that'll just become a bit of surface rust over time. And I'm pretty happy that I've got an area there now that will take a bit of abuse, and, you know, it may be at times I tack a frame or something down onto there to hold it while I build something up, and then cut it off again. So it's almost a sacrificial surface. It's meant to be a perfect build plate. It's going to be certainly better than a bit of plywood. I was using AutoSet Synergic MIG welding with gas shielded MIG wire, and it worked great. Get out to your shed.